Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm joined with the Horror Tavern. You might know him as BD Horror, but he's recently done a channel rebrand. I'm very proud of him. I'm glad that he's here tonight because we have a discussion topic that we've been dying to share with you all, and we're going to be talking about the top five kids' horror books or stories that feel like Disney Channel original movies. First and foremost, how are you doing tonight, Horror Tavern?
Yo, 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 people, it is the Horror Tavern, all new, brand new. How are y'all doing? I tried to enjoy Sweet Life of Zack and Cody, but obviously I got my bootleg from Ezekiel. So it was actually the Motel Life of Jack and Bobby. And the first episode was them selling fentanyl at a local Chuck E. Cheese. So I knew it was a bad decision to pick up from him. But that aside, we're talking about Disney Channel original movies and especially books that remind us of them. So this is fun, mainly because for those of you who obviously don't know, me and completionists are always talking about horror books that feel like DCOMs to us. We always end up finding some and we discuss it. So this has been a long awaited topic, and it's especially a fun one because him and I are both Disney Channel original movie fans. So this hits home.
I know. And the funny thing is, I think the commonality about all of our picks here is that DComs, if you look at the repertoire of Disney Channel original movies, they have the spooky, they actually have some scary, then they have the run of the mill stuff that probably will never fit into kids' horror. But ironically, there's kids' horror stories that fit into that latter column. They don't really fit into kids' horror, or not necessarily the subgenre that most people are thinking to get, but they end up being put into these series. And when you experience them, you're like, wait a minute. This isn't quite the narrative that you're used to. And in a lot of ways, they share almost identical characteristics to Disney Channel original movies, specifically like the ones from 1997 through like 2005. They have that old school flair to them. I guess modern ones too, but especially the ones I picked, I think could have been made into films back in the day, and I think a lot of yours as well.
For sure. Yeah. No, this is it's crazy because literally I always think that amongst the saturation that the kids horror genre had back in the day and Disney took over, I feel like these kids horror companies should have been making decom movies like kind of like rip-offs of that because they had so many stories that you could have made into fun movies and it probably would have helped out the genre back then.
Well, like back in the day, at least from like not 2000 to 2003, they were putting out like 12 movies a year. And then after a certain point, they started getting down to like eight and then six. And then nowadays, I think they're putting out three or four if you're lucky, which is kind of like how Goosebumps was, back in the day. They would put out so much content, hit the ground running, overexposure happened, and then you just have too much on your hands. But these, I feel like, were probably a missed opportunity for Disney to reach out and maybe like be like, "Hey, R.L. Stein, why don't you take this concept instead of putting it into this series? Why don't you give it to us? We'll buy it from you. We'll turn it into a movie." Or be like, "Hey, can we adapt this book from Goosebumps into a decom? It fits our mo. It fits what we're looking for." Uh, but yeah, it's just weird, how these things work. Um, so I guess the best way to do it is just hit the ground running and just start, because we have, I think, four of our own picks, but then we have the same top three. We agreed to have the same top three because we both experienced the top three, and
Mhm.
we unanimously agree that these feel like them. But we have our own four, and I'm gonna let you start off with your first one, and I'm curious to see what it is.
All right. So first, him and I both got some honorable mentions, so let's get that all out of the way. So my first honorable mention is from probably one of the longest. Well, it is the longest running, I think, kids horror show, and one of the most popular, and was back on Nickelodeon. Are You Afraid of the Dark? And one of the episodes that kind of struck home for me as a decom is because I was watching it when I used to binge the show, and it was so corny, so cheesy, yet felt so much like a Disney Channel original movie, reminded me of that Pocahontas, even a little bit atmosphere and the history behind it. And that's why I decided to pick it. So that is The Tale of the Long Ago Locket. So, for those of you who have not seen this episode, The Tale of the Long Ago Locket is about a boy named Jimmy. And Jimmy has a crush on a girl in his history class. He's daydreaming about her, he's staring at her in class, he can't pay attention. But even though he loves her and cares about her, he doesn't have the confidence to talk to her. And in fact, he ends up getting cucked quite a bit. Every time he has an opportunity to go talk to her, he misses his shot and acts like a complete klutz, a complete goofball, and yet she still has feelings for him. So you get that love relationship going. And what ends up happening is on a way back home one day, there's some woods by where he lives. And when he goes into the woods, he happens to see a little dagger and button. And when he goes there and checks in the woods, he ends up getting his hand grabbed by this stranger. And this stranger is definitely strange because he's wearing some old school clothing from the 1700s. And he thinks this must be some weirdo. Maybe there's some, I don't know, cosplaying event going on. But then he starts confessing to him that, hey, I'm a spy. I'm going to be hung by the redcoats. And all of a sudden it starts getting intense and freaky. And he doesn't know how to feel about it. And as the story progresses, let's just say that history starts to rewrite itself. And not just as a saying, no, in the literal sense in this town. So basically, this one felt a lot like a decom to me because, again, it has that corny love stuff in it, that classic love stuff that really is too goofy for kids' horror. Like you see it and you're just like, why is this in a horror show? It doesn't feel scary, it doesn't feel creepy. It just feels more so like corny, something you would see in a sitcom, something you'd see in an original movie. And even though it does deal with redcoats, it has obviously guns and hanging and stuff like that. It's more so played up in a childish way. At no point do you feel like their lives are actually in danger. It just kind of feels more like an adventure. And whenever a kid's horror one feels more like an adventure, focuses on love, focuses on relationships, and focuses on the morals, that always ends up being more like a decom to me. So this one felt perfect, especially with that ending, because rewriting history was actually helping a guy find love. And let's just say that helping a guy find love ended up helping the main character finally step up to the plate and get that girl that he deserved for a while. And also shout out to the guy because there's a character in here that's from Boy Meets World. So if you guys didn't know that, Disney, there you go. You got some connections to Disney right there. Boy Meets World, arguably one of the most popular Disney sitcoms of all time. So when you see that type of acting in here, it just takes you back to that nostalgic world of old Disney. And I just felt like this was a great pick. So that's my first honorable mention.
Yeah, and I've seen this episode too, and Will Friedle, the guy who plays the main character, Jimmy, he feels almost exactly like Eric Matthews or some other roles that he's played, like Duncan and My Day with the President's Daughter. That was not really a decom, but it was a Wonderful World of Disney movie that constantly aired on Disney Channel. And it's kind of fitting that he's the lead star in this episode because it does fit. I feel like if it was a decom, Disney would like stretch out the story, make it more themed around the Revolutionary War, probably add some bits that aren't in the episode. And I think that if the Disney Channel, station had the script, they could have made a better product than what Dark was able to do with it. So Dark is just low budget. I think it was trying to be a Twilight Zone thing, but it just ended up being like this mild coming of age story with a love note twist to it, and trying to rewrite history and be kind of like a romantic in the process. It's just not what kids horror is. It just doesn't feel like it fits in its own franchise. It's just, and I've said this before about Dark. Dark is that melting pot of genres for kids horror. It's not really mostly one thing like Goosebumps is known for, and it's more in line with something like The Haunting Hour. And I think some of our TV picks came from both of these shows because of that variety. But this just doesn't work as a kid's horror story. But like you said, I think it works better as a decom. So I could totally see that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, my pick, I don't think you've read this. I don't think you have. It's very short if you do decide to pick it up. It comes from the 6 R.L. Stine novellas. Now, the fun thing about this one is that it came out in 1991, but it was re-released under a new name in the novellas in the early 2000s. And the story here, because it was released in a kids' horror novella series, I thought I'd include it. It is The Amazing Adventure of Me, Myself, and I. And you see these little 3 clone boys on the cover, and then on the re-release with Tim Jacobus art, you get these 3 redhead ginger boys here. In this story, if you've ever seen the decom The Other Me, it feels right at home with this. And that's kind of why I picked it. But it's more so the structure of the story. To give you a rundown of what the story's about, you have this boy named Ira Fishman. He is kind of the everyday kid, very decom like. He's just the average kid. And he is wandering home one day and finds a claw machine. And inside the claw machine, there's a box. And he decides to win this box inside of the claw machine, takes it home, starts to mess around with it, and he accidentally creates a clone of himself. Now, because this is a cloning story and he's a kid, he gets the bright idea. He can do my baseball games. He can do my math homework. He can do all this for me, and I can just stay home and do all this cool stuff. Well, the problem is the clone is kind of stupid and messes everything up for him. And he gets in a lot of trouble and he has to deal with it. But now he comes to the conclusion that this clone might be doing this potentially on purpose to sabotage him, to get him out of the picture, and he can replace him or something. And there's something going on. So he feels like he can't go to his family to kind of handle this. So he decides to handle it himself and tries to keep it under the nose of his mom. And in the process, the clone actually creates a third version of him. And these two team up against him. And he has to figure out how to get rid of him. And because this is a corny book, the story kind of ends up on the note where Ira's able to kind of finish the day. His mom calls and says, "Hey, your aunt's coming to visit." And he's like, well, maybe I can use this box to get me out of this conundrum here. Because now he knows how to get rid of him and all that. It's just very decom-esque. It's not something you're supposed to take seriously. And for a horror story or something marketed as a horror story, there's not really any scares there. It's just, it goes to that level that most decom horror movies go down, where it's mildly eerie in the context of the situation. You don't really have over the top villains or just buffoonish villains trying to come after these kids, and they're easily defeatable. They're not really much threats when you think about it. But in this case, all the villains that are in the story are surrounding the character, and he's kind of experiencing all this himself. And while I think that is kind of standout for some of the spooky stories in DComs, there are some outliers, I would say. Like Don't Look Under the Bed is probably the most scariest one, and it feels nothing like the other ones that are marketed to the Halloween that's more family oriented. This one would have been more in the vein of a Goosebumps story, possibly because R.L. Stine wrote it, but it's the tone and the way the story unveils itself that is in line with that stuff. So that's why I picked it as my first honorable mention.
Yeah, no, Disney, I can't tell you how many times, not just Disney movies, but Disney sitcoms, that cloning shenanigans has been done. So that's a perfect fit. Cloning shenanigans always works perfectly with anything Disney.
Yeah, you'll have to, when you read it, you'll see what I'm talking about because, yeah, it's pretty on the nose. And it reminds me a lot, like I said, of that Other Me DCOM movie. And then I guess you could say it did get made. That's why I put it as my honorable mention. All right, BD. So what's your next honorable mention?
All right, to wrap up the honorable mention section, we're going to Haunting Hour, which my friend brought up. So Haunting Hour might raise some eyebrows to you guys because you're like, you know what? I remember Haunting Hour being consistently scary. I remember some memorable ones like Pumpkinheads, Really You, Scarecrow and stuff like that. But you may have forgotten that the holiday specials in Haunting Hour usually ended up being quite goofy, and they ended up usually being more friendly, more sort of Disney-esque. And one of the prime examples of that was the Valentine's Day special they had. And that's my honorable mention from Haunting Hour. It's Terrible Love, which we reviewed on the podcast last episode. So Terrible Love is about this girl who, in a similar way to Long Ago Locket, she's in chemistry class and she's daydreaming about this guy. He's dreamy, he's the perfect guy for her, but she can't work up that courage to talk to him, and she's invisible. She doesn't get noticed by him. And there's also a guy behind her, nerdy, that's in love with her. So you got this triangle thing going on, and everybody just wants to get each other's love. So what ends up happening is that while she's distracted, she pours, I think, like some chemical into a beaker, and it causes this explosion, this big accident. And as she's knocked back and assumingly almost dead, she wakes up and sees Cupid. And Cupid is played by David DeLuise, which, for those of you who may not ring a bell to that, he played the dad in Wizards of Waverly Place, which is one of the most popular Disney sitcoms and one of my favorites. So right away, that was one of the reasons why I picked it. You got him starring in it, and he brings that Disney charisma. Cupid is all stylish. He's got a suit on. He's thinking that he can bring her the love that she needs. He can make the guy basically recognize her. And although she seems very hesitant, eventually her feelings get in the way and she decides to let Cupid work his magic. However, in a Disney fashion, she ends up abusing the power of love. And by overusing his services, she ends up in a lot of trouble. Because let's just say that her new boyfriend loves her a bit too much. And that leads to the drama. This one was a clear pick to me because this episode has every single love trope that you get in any sitcom and any Disney type of movie you watch. You got that invisible, quirky girl who just wants to be noticed. You got that classic Chad Thundercock guy that she's into that doesn't know that she exists. You got the nerdy guy behind her who's looking for her affection. And David DeLuise basically has the same role that he plays in Wizards of Waverly Place. He's just that charismatic, funny dad. His mannerisms and charisma makes you really into the episode. And literally, it just reminded me a lot of stuff I've seen in other Disney shows. For one, another one of my favorite Disney sitcoms was My Babysitter's a Vampire. And there was actually an episode involving cologne that the main characters got, that when they sprayed it, their girls would basically be attracted to them, and they ended up abusing it in a similar way to what Haunting Hour did here. So that reminded me a lot of it. And again, it just has all those tropes, all that stuff, and it's not too scary overall. I mean, the over obsessed kind of boyfriend at the end was a little bit creepy, but even the way that he approaches the main girl is in that corny kind of way. You know, he calls her Pookie, he calls her his little love bug, his little twig, and it's just sort of done and played up to be, that kind of iconic, kind of goofy but creepy role. And yeah, it just reminded me a lot of Disney, and especially that ending. That twist ending at the end of the episode will make you laugh out loud because it is one of the cheesiest endings I've ever seen to a Haunting Hour episode. And I literally imagined that being the end to a Disney Channel original movie. I could have imagined that. Maybe they would have had to change it a little bit, but I definitely could have seen that scene played in there. And yeah, this one is it's a fun one. It's corny, it's cheesy. You'll like it. And yeah, just watch out for any love bugs. I don't support love bugs at all, unless it's the mom that plays in Sweet Life of Zach and Cody. She can be my love bug. But yeah, that's my pick for Haunting Hour.
Yeah, I was like, when I think about Haunting Hour, I always think of like Goodwill Towards Men or something like that. That could be a decom. But then when we watched Terrible Love recently, I was like, yeah, this could have been like a Valentine's movie or something like that. Could have been cheesy. They would have definitely probably leaned into a movie that they released. I don't think it was an official one, but they had it like on the repertoire for a while. It was called Zapped, where there was like a mind control app where girls can control the minds of men and like make them do whatever they want and like them and whatever. Yeah, it's kind of like that. And since that concept has been done, I can kind of see this working in that vein. I don't know how would have worked if the shoes were reversed, and and we got the ending that we got, and maybe more of that character in the movie where he ends up being like the actual hero of the story because the girl's just not getting the memo. That could have been clever to do. You know, I'm glad that you put it on an honorable mention because personally, I think that it could have been a little too mean spirited for Disney to want to do. But then again, I could see the at least the concept of it definitely being in there, and a lot of the tropes, like you said, fit into that mold.
For sure.
All right. So my second honorable mention is actually a modern Goosebumps book, and I was actually torn because there's a couple of moderns that I think could fit, and like a Halloween decom kind of thing. But this one has Disney written all over it. It's more of a fantastical story. There's a concept where you have to put disbelief at the door immediately, so Disney would be all over this, like white on rice. And it is Fright Night from Slappy World. Okay, this concept of this, just hear me out. It's straight up Disney. All right. So this kid named Kelly, he's a fish out of water. He's moving from a small town to a suburb area, and it's around Halloween or near that time of year. And there's an annual dance in his new town every year where they have this Fright Night dance that somebody in the school is selected to be the date of the school monster. And every school in their school area has a monster. Parents know this. Parents know the risks of this, but they're all cool with it. There's a 10% likelihood that you can possibly get eaten by this monster, but it's only 10%. And that lingers in the back of Kelly's mind when he first moves to the town. And this kid named Gordo kind of dares him to go down into the monster's lair in the basement of the school and try to feed him some food. And he makes the monster mad by giving him food that it's allergic to. And before you know it, Kelly is chosen to be the date with the with the school monster mascot at Fright Night, and he's panicked, and he has to recruit the help of his friend that's from his former town, and she comes to his new town to help him figure out a solution. And the solution is go to another nearby school, grab their monster, and have their monster be the date to their school monster at the Fright Night dance. And there's a lot of fun hijinks involved with that, a lot of innocent scares, some funny humor that actually lands. Actually, semi dark monster moments, but it's never taken too far because anything dark that it does, it kind of reverses itself. And the ending is super cheesy, super cheesy, and even the twist to the story is like a DCOM type of twist. So this fits right at home, and I think most people that have read this probably would agree with that. It just feels like a fantastical DCOM to me.
Well, that is probably one of the wildest plots that I heard from a Goosebumps book, and I like wild plots, so I think I'll enjoy that one.
Yeah, it's almost like some elements that you'll see in Halloween Town, where
Yeah.
you just if you don't have the disbelief there, you're not going to buy into it. But yeah.
Fun.
So yeah, let's get into our top five now. Let's get
Okay.
into our top five, and I think we've mostly experienced everything that we've put in our top five. But why don't you share yours first?
All right. So starting off number 5, we're actually going to an OG62 Goosebumps book, and this was one that I heard a lot of hype about. A lot of people have this as their fan favorite, and this one to me felt like a GYG that was kind of like a mainline book. It felt like it wanted to be more of that GYG route, very adventurous, very quirky, and a lot of parts of it reminded me of a DCOM. And honestly, I think that although the episode is quite a bit different that got adapted and it is goofy. I think if they took this original plot, made it into an accurate Disney Channel original kind of movie with a higher budget, I think this would have been a fun story to watch. And that is How I Got My Shrunken Head. So, How I Got My Shrunken Head is about a kid named Mark who is obsessed with jungles. He plays video games about jungles. He reads about jungles. If you take a shot for every time he says jungle, you're going to be passed out within the first 5 pages of this book. He loves jungles. And what ends up happening is that basically his aunt comes by. And when his aunt comes by, she basically offers him a trip to Balladora. And well, not his aunt, but her aunt's assistant, because his aunt is studying in Balladora and she wants him to come over. And right away, Mark is very much kind of in love with this idea because he loves jungle. And Balladora is untamed wilderness on a remote island. And he gets to spend the time with the aunt that he loves. So he decides to take up on the opportunity. They hitch a ride over there. And what ends up happening is that a shrunken head that he was given as a gift ends up having more importance on this island as he finds out that his aunt is actually missing and that the Haulings that are over there actually are trying to find her. She has some research partners, they're trying to find her, and they think that Mark might be able to help her. However, as Mark starts to go through the story, there's a mystery happening in Balladora, and he has to figure out what the mystery is, who's actually involved, who he can trust, and whether this shrunken head that he got as a gift actually does have more to it than meets the eye. So this story to me very much felt like a DCOM because as soon as you get to Balladora, you have this basically giant adventure going on. He avoids getting eaten by tigers. He gets out of a sinkhole. He takes on some giant ants. And this shrunken head that he has basically has abilities. And this abilities kind of work like a magic wand. He can control the jungle, he can control vines, he can control wildlife, and he kind of becomes the king of the jungle, what he's wanted to be his whole life. And going from this basically suburb town to this wild remote place and having to figure out this mystery all by yourself as a middle schooler is a decom story setup. And on top of that, the morals behind the Shrunken Head reminded me of Disney because it sort of teaches you to respect the kind of like the local tribes and local people of Balladora. They're talking very much about the culture and how it kind of got disrespected, how it's being taken advantage of, and why Mark is kind of like the savior in this situation. He's bringing back the respect, he's paying homage to these people, and he really does care about them, and he cares about his aunt. And people who are basically trying to exploit it and exploit the Shrunken Head and the tribe for all it's worth, they're sort of the villains in the story. So you got that moral messaging that Disney usually goes for. And the climax to this story, something happens that I'm not going to go into detail about, but it reminded me of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. And that part got even more played up in the episode. So it reminded me a lot about Disney. I think this is a fun one. And trust me, when you read the twist ending to this book, you're going to be like, oh yeah, this is Disney. Because I'm not surprised if that twist ending involving a certain Shrunken Head would have became a big plot point if they decided to adapt a movie, because it would have been made into like a fun little companion to run along with Mark in the Jungle. So that's my pick. I think it could have benefited from being a decom movie. And honestly, this is a fun adventure one. I can see people liking this story if it got adapted. And honestly, I kind of wish it did. So that's my number 5.
It's funny that you say that because when I think about Shrunken Head, I always think about the episode. Even the changes in the episode feel like a decom.
Yeah.
even that like some mild adult humor for the adults watching with the kids to understand and pick up on. Everything that Disney was known for, like in those early decoms, is prevalent in that episode. And it's also prevalent in this book. And I'm glad that you brought up some of the tropes here because Mark is the typical decom protagonist. He's an ordinary kid, might have some weird hobbies or interests. Like there's a movie called My Mom's Got a Date with a Vampire. The kid's obsessed with vampires, right? And he actually has to deal with a real vampire. That's the plot of the story. Well, this one, he's obsessed with jungles, and he actually has to go deal with the perils of a jungle. But he has this supernatural thing that ends up being possibly the saving grace to how he's able to become the hero. And Disney loves making kids become the hero, become the savior, become all of this. And Mark is that typical scenario. Now, Goosebumps does have heroic characters, but a lot of the times they're in plots where it's too serious for Disney to tackle. Like Welcome to Camp Nightmare is a good example. Kids go missing. It's harrowing though. It's actually frightening. It's genuinely tense. This is just Mark wandering through the jungle, having some mishaps, having some close calls, but he's never actually in danger because that shrunken head he carries around is his life raft. It is his plot armor. It's going to carry him through the story. And Disney loves that crap. Disney loves it. And the way that the villains are revealed, Dr. Hollings, the Hollings family themselves, textbook villain reveals of a decom. Textbook. Great pick. I'm glad you picked that one. I was going to pick it, but then I was like, you wanted that one, so I'll let you have it.
I'll give a little shout out to, if you want to get a Disney sitcom that kind of feels like Shrunken Head a little bit, you should go watch Pair of Kings with Mitchell Musso. That one takes place in a remote jungle island, and that one actually kind of gives me some Shrunken Head feel too. So they almost had it. Pair of Kings kind of feels like Shrunken Head a little bit. So that also is a good choice. If you guys want to go watch another jungle adventure story, go watch that one.
And fruit for thought, Disney actually made 2 island-based stories in its time. It made Jumping Ship and Even Stevens the movie. Both are set on deserted islands. Okay, you can't tell me that the budget's not there for this to be a decom. No, it's there. They can easily work with it. I mean, shoot, look at the original Goosebumps show. They had probably way less budget than a movie would, and they filmed that in Canada and made it look like a jungle. So there you go. Excuses. Great pick, BD. My number 5, I think, fits in the same realm. You have a similar feeling villain, similar recontextualizations. A lot of Disney tropes are in this. It's an Are You Afraid of the Dark episode, and it's the Tale of the Guardian's Curse. That's my number 5. Guardian's Curse. It has that, I don't know, Night at the Museum. It has that Under Wraps. If you've ever seen 1997, the film from 1997, Under Wraps, it almost has an identical setup where you have this sarcophagus that's found beneath this museum. And this museum curator, he is interested in knowing more about the sarcophagus. So he calls this doctor named Dr. Dugan. And Dr. Dugan in this episode, just factoid here, played the dad in Night of the Living Dummy 3. Food for thought. But he has to bring his kids with him because he's a single father. And his kids are upset because they get to now miss out on their ski vacation. And they go into this whole thing where they're upset that their dad is too busy with work. This is a typical 90s cliche with dads being too obsessive with their job and not attentive enough to their kids. It's been overdone. No different here. But the kids, one of the kids understand that their father kind of needs this work because he doesn't have a girlfriend. And the other one just wishes that he had one and just want this experience that they're going through at this museum to be over with. But there are some discoveries where the sarcophagus, when it's open, there's potentially a guardian's curse. And while there's a creepy mummy inside, there's an inscription saying that there's an elixir of life and a ring of eternity. And they have to figure out where it's at, but they don't really know where it is. And they discover it by accident, of course, because sometimes Disney, like sometimes kids' horror protagonists or Disney protagonists, they accidentally do something and it starts off this whole, grandiose event that carries the movie. So they accidentally pour this elixir of life onto the mummy, resurrect it, and they think they're being followed by it. But then, as the story goes along, they realize who the real villain is. And it may or may not be the museum curator. And in typical Disney fashion, there is a corny cornball twist, let's just say that, involving the mummy woman, because the mummy's a woman. And it kind of plays into the dad needing a girlfriend. Let's just say it like that. Yeah. And everybody ends off in a kumbaya way. Textbook Disney. Textbook Disney. It, like I said, I already made the comparisons to the original Under Wraps movie. Yeah, it's not as goofy and comedic as that film is. It actually has some scary, tense scenes here and some implications with the main bad and all that. But when you sit down and dissect the tropes and how far it goes, it doesn't go too far. And that's in the similar vein as most Halloween DComs. And the villain, like I said, feels right at home with a Dr. Hollings or the average villain, like the magician villain from Now You See It from Disney Channel. Same idea, same type of villain.
That's a good pick. No, as soon as you told me about that twist, I was like, yeah, that's some Disney plotline right there.
Not only do the kids get to have their dad back and get to have a vacation, but now they get a new potential stepmom out of it. That might be a cool stepmom to have. What? Because you know how Disney loves to put ordinary kids into extraordinary circumstances and give them just bragging rights of something absurd like that. Yeah, that's weird. All right. Yeah, you should check this episode out. You really should. I think you'd like it. Or maybe not like it, actually, knowing you, but...
That hurts, but it's true.
All right, let's move on to number 4. What's your number 4, BD?
All right, number 4, we are getting back to Haunting Hour, but now we are not doing a corny episode. We're doing one of my favorite episodes, and actually one of Completionist's favorite episodes, too. This episode, to me, is one that I fell in love with, and although it does have the aspect of horror movies to it, it does have a brief transformation scene in it that can be a little bit much. It's still played up to be kind of that old school cheesy horror, and you don't get anything too graphic, and you actually end up getting a story about a beautiful friendship between two kids that are in a coming of age story, and they're basically hobbies and obsessions, and that is Creature Feature. Creature Feature is a fantastic Haunting Hour episode. For those of you who don't know anything about it, there is a kid who's the main character, played by Joel Courtney, my favorite kids horror kid actor out there. He does a fantastic job. He's funny, he's witty, kind of like a Peter Parker personality to him, except in this case, instead of being like a nerd involving gadgets and technology, he's in love with those old school cheesy kind of horror movies, Attack of the Teenage Tick, kind of Beach Party Massacre, and plays on that. And he loves watching those movies basically every single day. And he has a friend who's played by Brendan Meyer. And Brendan Meyer is from another one of my favorite Haunting Hour episode, The Dead Body. So having Joel Courtney and Brendan Meyer together, awesome combo. And Brendan Meyer's character has been his friend for a while. However, he's starting to come of age. He wants to go out, he wants to experience life. And there's actually a girl, a popular girl, that he's trying to kind of rizz up and get with. And his friend is kind of holding him back because his friend is a nerd. He kind of loves being an introvert. Meanwhile, this guy has been an introvert his whole life and he just wants to experience life. And you have this dilemma between interests and their friendship kind of being tested. But again, what ends up happening is because they're such good friends, Joel Courtney's character basically ends up going with Brendan Meyer and this popular girl, and they decide to go head to the beach. However, as they're heading to the beach, this ominous fog rolls in. And when this fog rolls in, there's this old school movie theater that pops up out of nowhere. It's like a drive-in theater. It's basically abandoned. And right away, the main character lights up. He hops out. He goes in. And what do you know? All of his favorite, cheesy horror movies are in there. Attack of the Giant Leeches and those kind of things. And specifically, Attack of the Teenage Tick, one of his favorite movies. As he goes in, he sees that, filled with popcorn. It's all to himself. They can have a fun time. And right away, the girl and Brendan Meyer try to go get him. And then they don't find him. And next thing you know, it gets into a crazy plot that may or may not involve the kid being sucked into the movies. Now, if that plot line doesn't sound like a DCOM movie to you, I don't know what does. And trust me, man, it's fantastic. I absolutely love this one. It's cheesy, but not in a kind of put off way. It's actually sort of endearing. And again, I love the friendship between Brendan Meyer and Joel Courtney. They have one of the best friendships, I think, in kids' horror, especially in Haunting Hour, because you can generally see in a Disney Channel kind of way that they do love each other and they do try to take care of each other. And sometimes, as you can see in part two, love doesn't always have to be affectionate. Sometimes it's tough love. Sometimes it's making those decisions that are hard on you personally, but it ends up benefiting the other people. And as you get into this wild story about potentially Joel Courtney transforming, dealing with some problems, you eventually get to Brendan Meyer trying to save him. And then the ending to this episode, this two-parter, is beautiful because it kind of plays into maybe me saving him is actually hurting him. And maybe the fantasy world is the one that he loves the most. This adventure, this absurdity, this is what makes him happy. And I'm actually holding him back by trying to keep him around me. And you get this departure between friends, but simultaneously their bond becomes closer together. And yeah, this is fun. You got over the top villains. You have Matt Angel, the son of Dan Angel, the writer and worked on Goosebumps. His son is in this, and his son also played Jake Skinner from Dead Body, one of my favorite villains. He comes back in this role, but he's goofy. He's the over-the-top mad scientist, super evil, just that ha laugh, and played up really well. And I think the girl from Terrible Love is actually the love interest to Joel Courtney inside of the actual horror movie. So you got a bunch of people coming together for this kind of corny story that's just done in a really fun way. And honest to God, if any of the stories on this list I feel not just could have been a DCOM, but should have been a DCOM, this one to me, if it was made into a full movie with a higher budget, get a bigger cast, more monsters, more movies involved, probably would have been one of my favorite movies of all time. So that's my number 4 pick.
And yeah, like Creature Feature, in my opinion, is probably my favorite Haunting Hour episode because it's in the vein of Goosebumps corny, and it has that charm. It's just charming. But a lot of the time with charming, especially when we're dealing in kids horror, things walk fine line of, is it too scary? Is the tone too dark? Or is this too goofy and out there to be rooted in realism? Creature Feature walks that tightrope very evenly on all three categories. It has its dark moments, but it has its goofy moments. It has its scares, but it has its lighthearted heartfeltness to it. and it has a distinct message and theme that carries throughout the whole thing. The kid, one lives in the fantasy world, one lives in the real world. One wants to grow up, have a normal life. One doesn't see the value in normal life. They're both best friends. They both care about each other. And what makes it more harrowing is actually the experience the kid that lives in the fantasy world goes through, because the body horror and all that, the transformation, him becoming the monster of his obsession, is more of a metaphorical thing. And I think Disney, and a lot of times, if they have the right writer on the script of these movies, they know how to tell a metaphorical tale. They know how to weave in themes into the story, and they know how to write characters in a smart and unique way. And I think you hit it right on the money. I think where it actually sells me more on it being a decom is the ending. Everything else might seem kind of a stretch, but hear me out. They're, like I've already brought up this movie, Don't Look Under the Bed. Some of the effects in that movie are legitimately so scary that parents wrote to Disney and they pulled that movie from syndication for years. That should tell you that I think this could have been like a very early one if they were going to do it, but I think parents probably would have complained about the effects. So probably might have been toned down just a little bit. I know that the fingernail scene, little too Jeff Goldblum to fly, a little too much. And honestly, that makeup when he's like mid in between human and tick is absolutely petrifying. Okay, that would have no. I don't think the Disney demographic can handle that. But if you tweak those things, I think the plot and the story could have easily been one. But yeah, great pick.
Definitely a fun one. I wish it would have gotten a sequel. Out of all the Haunting Hour stories that I felt needed a sequel, that one needed one. But again, the ending to it is great as well. And again, as soon as a certain character at the end of the story said fade to black, I just had this huge, like, kid-like smile on my face, and I almost shed a tear. So I was like, you know what? This is more of a heartfelt story than an actual horror story.
Yeah, totally agree there. Now my number four here is what I consider a decom in the bad way, because this is a book that I encountered in kids horror that does not belong in kids horror, but it's also reminiscent of those holiday decoms, and some of the worst ones. I'm not talking about the more recognizable ones. I'm talking about the cheesy, forgettable ones. And that is We Wish You a Scary Christmas from Spine Tinglers. Now, this little thing here, Shad and Virgil, the two main characters, the two best friends, they're pretty much the quintessential decom protagonists as well. They are two kids. They love adventure. They live in this small town. They have this tree house built on this property they've been allowed to go to for years. But ever since a new family moved on the property, every time they try to go to the tree house, they get bothered by, like they get bothered with the family. The family is known as the Slagles, and the Slagles' oldest son is very weird and very protective of his younger brother. But his younger brother seems to be more open to talking with Shad and Virgil about maybe using the treehouse. But when they try to talk to this boy, he comes forward with a story saying, "Hey, you got to help me. My family's a little bit cuckoo," and he tells him like, there's a dark secret. You're not going to believe me if I told you. Well, as the story goes along, Shad and Virgil realize that Santa Claus, the real life Santa Claus, may or may not be imprisoned down in the Slagles family basement. Now, that might sound kind of scary, right? And it should on paper. But the way this story executes it is very decom like. So the boy's trying to be friends with this kid, but the parents are overbearing and don't want this little boy to hang out with Shad and Virgil. So they have to find ways around it to get more information and maybe figure out how to get Santa Claus free, because Christmas is coming up, right? They have to save Christmas. These are the heroes of the story. They have to deal with the older brother many times. They have to figure out a plan, and majority of the story is literally figuring out a plan. They're trying out different ideas. Some ideas don't stick. They have to reformulate the plan, yada yada. Before you know it, they come up with this idea that surprisingly delivers a climax that is mildly tense, but in the typical decom fashion, they end up saving Christmas. They save Christmas in the cheesiest way possible. The story wraps up in a holly jolly, kumbaya moment, and everybody seems to have forgiven each other for what they've done in the story. And that's what you're going to expect out of this. Okay, let me tell you, let me tell you this: every Hallmark, Disney Channel, Disney Christmas movie you could think of, every trope about Christmas, about kids loving Christmas, about kids wanting to save Christmas, having to save Christmas, having to, maybe help Santa Claus because helping Santa Claus on Christmas has to be the coolest thing ever to a kid in a Disney movie. It is in here. It is in here. And the way they treat the villains is so DCOM like because they're not really the villains of the story because there's an aspect to it where they were trying to help Santa all along. They weren't trying to harm him by keeping him there. They were looking out for him because there was an accident. Okay, there weren't really threats all along. They were just being secretive and protective over this holiday secret. Okay, then that's why I picked it. It's not kids horror whatsoever. It's an actual like Christmas DCOM movie, essentially.
Yeah, no, we need to get, what is it, a movie called Mom, We Stole Santa, and then the cover has to be that kid always doing.
Literally, the poster cover, if they had like a Disney ad back in the magazines back in the day, probably would have been Shad and Virgil going like this to a basement door with like Santa Claus's hat and sleigh bells hanging out of it or something.
Yeah, just get Macaulay Culkin to play one of them and good to go.
Yeah, and like it just the whole plot unfolds like one, and I was thinking that the entire time I was reading it. And if you ever get to read it, you'll see what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
It's kind of bad.
good.
It's kind of bad, even for like a holiday movie standard. So,
and it's crazy how all those Disney Channel, holiday movies, like the Christmas ones, they all end up blending together. Like you're right, like they all have the same tropes, the same kind of things, and they all just kind of mush in your head after you've like rewatched all of them.
I think like in general, Christmas kids horror all blend to me. They all have the same kumbaya feel to it at the end. Always, always. And it harps on the same tropes like the spirit of Christmas and blah blah blah. That's the message. And when you have the same message, I'm good.
Get bored.
I get bored of it. This is probably the most boring example of it though.
Oof.
Okay, so let's go into our number 3. So from now, our top 3, we have the same picks.
Indeed.
Yeah.
All right. So number 3, we're going into the Halloween spirit. And if there was any book that I could think of that represents the Halloween spirit, it being the least scariest way and more so very much into the tropes, into the atmosphere, the vibe of Halloween, it'll be this book. And funny enough, it's from Spine Tinglers. So let's talk more about Spine Tinglers, people. We're talking about another holiday special for Spine Tinglers that is Wear and Scare, number 3 on our list. Now, Wear and Scare, there you go. It's about a kid named Sam. And from what I can remember, it's been a while, but Sam and his school is basically a part of this kind of like club and council, and they always host a haunted house. This haunted house they do for every Halloween. The town gets involved, the kids get involved, and they all come. However, this time they want to make it special. They want to make it stand out. And Sam's mom, her sister, his aunt, is actually an actress. And she actually knows a lot about makeup, a lot about the visual effects that go into movies. And they decide, you know what? She's crazy enough, she's loony enough that if she lets us borrow her house for Halloween and we get her help to decorate it, we can make this the best Halloween ever. Everybody could get involved, everybody could have a great time, and we would look so awesome to the town. If that doesn't sound like a Charlie Brown special to you, I don't know what does. But they get that going. And of course, they have to find good costumes because if they want to make this the best Halloween, they have to convince the aunt, they have to get her involved. They themselves have to come to the table with the best stuff. So they decide to go get costumes, and they eventually end up being taken to a costume shop that kind of looks worn down, not so different from like the Haunted Mask, that kind of worn down costume place. And they end up finding this owner named Mr. Slytherin. No, not Harry Potter. All you Harry Potter fans back up. We're not talking about that, all right? Mr. Slytherin here is this kind of creepy older guy. The way I imagined him was kind of like Dr. Vink from Are You Afraid of the Dark, that kind of look. He's kind of that older guy, kind of looks a little bit iffy, but they get into the shop and they see all these great costumes and they're like, you know what, these are good, but they're not quite right. And then Sam sees this skeleton costume and he picks it up and it's unlike any other costume he's ever seen before because as he tries it on in the dingy dressing room, it's dark, there's not enough light, and he feels like he looks like an actual skeleton. And then he thinks he starts hallucinating because he thinks he can start hearing, when he moves his arm, it sounds like the bones are creaking with it. And it sounds like his joints are locking. And he actually sounds like an actual skeleton. And he thinks maybe this is just his own imagination. He's getting a little bit paranoid. And as the story goes on, they try to make the best Halloween they can and they get into some trouble. So that's basically the story. This one to me, the epitome of a decom. It's so simple, so to the point. You want to make the best Halloween, you want to get a haunted house. A lot of the story involves them trying on these costumes, setting up the haunted house. And when you actually get to the climax, it's not that creepy as you think it'd be. It's not dark. You don't get anything that's too creepy that you can't have it in Disney. No, in fact, it's a lot of basic stuff. Just them feeling a little bit off in their costumes. Maybe they start acting more like the creatures and monsters they're dressed up as. They start losing energy and they feel like their life force is draining while their personalities are changing during the night of Halloween. But again, it all goes well. Kind of like Charlie Brown. Everyone's experiencing the haunted house, fake eyeballs and green goo and bowls and stuff that the aunt made. And then you have this underlying thing, which is the fact that, Mr. Slytherin, while he does have one creepy scene in the book that I think is maybe it might be a little bit too much for Disney, which was a backyard scene. Not the one at the end, but the one in the middle. That kind of felt too much like real life horror, kind of like someone stalking you in your house, trying to spy on you. That was a little bit too much. But for the rest of the book, he's very much kind of a bare bones child, kid's horror villain. He's creepy, but he's got this goofy look to him. And the climax ending is just, to put it in a Shakespearean way, batshit insane. It's a crazy climax ending to the book. And you just feel like, you know what, this is definitely that kind of Disney super climactic. If you've seen the Scream Team or like, movies like that, Halloween Town. This is that kind of super spectacular ending. And it ends off with like kind of like a happy go lucky for the kids thing. So, again, that kumbaya ending, that resolution for the kids. And this one definitely felt like a Halloween special to me. So I want to hear your thoughts because we both had the same one. So
Yeah, like I was gonna say this. A lot of the times in the Halloween decoms, like two prime examples, the Scream Team and Halloween Town 2. The story, when you really sit down and think about it, is super simple. It's very straight and linear to the point. Like Halloween Town 2, it's set on Halloween night. Barney and her siblings and her families are throwing a Halloween party. They might move over to the school dance, Halloween dance later on. This guy comes in, steals a spell book. They go to Halloween Town to get the spell book. They have to solve the mystery of why they're all gray. And then once they solve that mystery, they come back and defeat the villain. That's straightforward, pretty much not too complex at all. Scream Team, granddad passes away. They go to his hometown. They go into his home, find a file. They find some evidence that maybe his spirit hasn't moved on or might have been captured by this soul stealer. They follow some spirits. They find a group. They ask for help to get their grandpa's soul back. And they fight valiantly to do it. And then once they find out more of the truth behind the villain, they try to save the villain too. And it's kind of heartfelt. This story is very simple. Like you said, just kids wanting to throw a Halloween party people will never forget. A lot of the stuff dealing with the Aunt Emma and their mom, very touching. I could totally see scene building already. We've talked about this book in the past where the first half feels kind of monotonous with all the dialogue and stuff, but they can easily scene build with this and build up, a solid story and characterize these characters enough and add more into the story when they go to try on a costume at this place. It does remind me of a Disney-fied haunted mask, or in a lot of ways, it also reminds me of Haunting Hours Don't Think About It movie when the girl goes to that Halloween store and it's like old and decrepit, and when they go back, it's disappeared. It literally happens in this book too. So It could just be spooky, you know. It feels like that, but like a Disney version of it, and the final climax pretty much on par with all the other ones. Um, yeah, nothing too scary, nothing too spooky. I mean, shoot, Halloween Town 2, Calabar's Revenge. There's a scene where costumes turn people into monsters. I mean, and there was actually a transformation scene that actually creeped me out as a kid, where the mom gets transformed into like this green goblin thing. It was terrifying. So yeah, I wouldn't have minded a full movie around that concept. I think that would have been fun.
Yeah, for sure. No, this is it's just like that good Halloween comfort read. Like nothing too crazy, nothing too wild. You just feel good after reading it, and that's why I think it's got that charm to it that just works for Disney.
Yeah, it's yeah. That's why when I first read this, like it is just a scratch that like Halloween DComs just haven't brought over the years, and just finding this little gem of a book, I guess to even call it that, because it feels like that. I don't know. It just clicked. I don't know what it is. That might be a special case thing. But
Hmm.
this is one of the cases. This is one of the cases where it's good to be a DCOM because I think that's what gives it the charm.
For sure.
All right, so we have the same number two, and our number two goes to original 62 book. It's actually quite famous, or I guess divisive. It depends on what lens and what groups you go into. We're talking about the original Deep Trouble, the original OG. Even the sequel you can probably throw into this discussion to a degree, or the episode interpretation of both books mixed together. They all have this decom quality to them. If you don't know anything about Deep Trouble, the main character is named Billy Deep, and him and his sister are visiting their out of this world uncle. He's like a world renowned scientist, oceanographer, or whatever he does. He's like a big name in science, right? And they're out in the Caribbean, tropical destination. They're living the lap of luxury, larger than life lifestyle that kids that come to DComs want. They want that escapism, they want that teenage fantasy, and that's essentially what this book is in a nutshell. It's just a bona fide teenage fantasy. Well, Billy Deep, he likes to dive, he likes to swim. You get some harrowing depictions of him finding this giant sea monster creature, and he has to try to prove himself that this thing actually happened to him and he's not just blowing smoke up people's butts. But in the process, he ends up seeing a mermaid, and this mermaid gets captured by him and his uncle and his lab assistant and his sister Sheena, and they're all mesmerized that they have a mermaid. But because this is on our decom list, you got to see what the morals and the messages are. Billy and Sheena feel bad that they captured a mermaid because this is a sentient being. This is life. So they don't want to hurt the life. They don't want to hurt the mermaid. Well, it becomes a matter of dire straits because Dr. Deep's lab assistant wants this mermaid for himself. Once he makes some calls, he gets some pretty much pirates to come and ambush Dr. Deep, and Billy and Sheena takes the mermaid and threatens to leave him to die, essentially, which is kind of dark. But because they are nice to the mermaid, and like a Disney fashion, the mermaid's friends come and guide them to where the mermaid is, and they're able to solve the problem and fix the day. And then Billy gets a mild twist, but nothing too dark or anything, where he sees the sea monster again and all that, but it's done in an innocent way. Obviously, he comes back in a sequel, so there's that. I think the real reason why this is a decom is just because, in terms of horror, the horror here is more rooted in these type of villains we keep bringing up, like the villain from Guardian's Curse or the villain from Shrunken Head. These are just not real threats when you think about it. They can't really do you much harm unless they have the right people or right equipment to back them. But they're also defeated in some over the top way, in that fantastical way that Disney likes to do it. And the whole play on mermaids. This honestly feels like the 13th Year, but if it was a Goosebump story. If you've ever seen the 13th Year, not quite the same, but it involves this kid named Cody turning into a mermaid. And there's some body horror. There's actually body horror in that movie. I've seen some people say that it's a horror film. Well, I can kind of see that. His real mom lives out in the ocean, but there's people trying to prove that mermaids exist and has a similar message. Leave the mermaids alone. They're sentient beings. Leave them alone. That's this book. Same message and all that. Just a little bit different in plot. PD, you want to say something about it?
Yeah, this one, when I read it, it reminded it literally felt like one of those Goosebumps books that I kind of understand why the episode did not adapt the first book, because there's no way they could have pulled it off. This needs that movie budget, because it just feels like one big adventure book. It is the perfect Goosebumps adventure book kind of idea to me. And it reminded me of so many things. First of all, if you've seen that movie series, I think it's called H2O with the mermaids. Instantly thought about that with the mermaids. All right, instantly thought about that. If you've seen Free Willy, same kind of
It's basically Free Willy, yeah.
Free Willy. All right. If you've been to SeaWorld, in the same way you feel about those killer whales, you're gonna feel about this mermaid. Same sort of morals, same sort of protecting wildlife. Wildlife needs that respect. They have as much respect as we do, and we need to make sure that they're out in the wild and free. It even gets into that dilemma between, is the mermaid really protected in captivity, or is she imprisoned? And is the wild ocean that's potentially dangerous to her species actually the better idea? And Billy Deep, to me, funny enough, he's that kind of adventurous, cocky, just really fun kind of kid character that I like. I don't know for what reason, but he kind of reminded me of like Ben 10. Have you ever seen the OG Ben 10 show? They kind of have similar personalities. And funny enough, I think the second episode to Ben 10 is the Kraken episode. And the Kraken episode in Ben 10 was a similar plot to this. It was basically the Kraken was this misunderstood wild animal that scientists were trying to steal eggs from and basically exploit. And Ben thought that the original good guys ended up actually being the villains. Same thing here. They think that the zoologist and all these people are actually, good characters. Turns out they might be villains. Their intentions are not as good as you think they are. And it just had a lot of stuff like that that reminded me of so many different movies. And this is honestly a perfect decom. I can see it. I can see it working so well. And even like that twist you brought up, he survives in the next book. So honestly, I could have seen my boy Billy with a spear just going at this giant octopus monster in a similar kind of adventurous fashion, because Billy Deep is one of the best characters out there. I think that if they managed to make a decom out of this, he would have been a well-loved person. And the morals behind this just appease to everybody, because let's be real, who doesn't love wildlife? There's a reason it works. All these wildlife films with the morals, it hits home for us as kids, and we all want to be like Billy Deep at the end of the day.
I could totally see if it was a decon, they would change the twist slightly to be Billy sees the Kraken monster, and instead of like having like a implied dark ending, his mermaid friend comes up next to him and they say, let's go play with the Kraken," or something corny like that. That's what they would have done. So there you go.
For sure.
But I'm gonna let you take over for our number one, and this one has to be the most synonymous thing to this topic. Everybody says this. Everybody we've talked to about this book or story in general always says this should have been a decom.
Yeah. All right, man. This book I read recently, and all my friends told me that if you go into this book with the mindset of thinking it like a decom, you're going to like it a lot. And guess what? I liked it a lot. And this book should have been a decom. This one should have been. I think that if they did the budget right, if they managed to get some of the effects right, this would have been such a fun movie. And me personally, probably would have been my favorite if I ever saw it. And that is How I Learned to Fly. You guys expected it. Come on, let's be real. You expected it to be on here. The main character's name is Jack Johnson. Come on, people. Jack Johnson. That's a freaking Disney name, bro. And guess what Jack Johnson dilemma is? He's narrating the story, and he loves a girl named Mia. And she's so kind, she's so nice, but my boy is locked in for life in that friend zone. And it's all because of his arch nemesis, Wilson. Chad Thundercock. He can't beat him. That guy is always one-upping him in everything that he does. He always makes Mia laugh more. If Jack ends up having some fun activity for Mia to do with him, His rival already got to it first and in fact did something better. And he's always getting clowned on. Him and Wilson are friends, but they have this rivalry. They're always butting heads. And Mia likes both of them. Mia likes hanging out with both of them. She likes kind of having them involved, and they're always competing over her because they both like her. And what ends up happening is that Jack Johnson ends up going to this birthday party of Mia, and he gets clowned on, quite literally gets clowned on. He gets completely humiliated, involving a game of Twister, which is about as Disney as you can get. Losing in a game of Twister, that is Disney, man. And he basically ends up running away, which made me laugh out loud because I literally imagined him running away on the street, crying. His friends are chasing after him, and he goes to the beach. And he ends up at this kind of abandoned beach house that everybody sort of knows being creepy. And he hides in there. His friends are looking for him, shouting for him. Mia shouting for him to come back. He doesn't come back. He's so humiliated. And you end up with this pretty creepy kind of abandoned house scene. It's not too crazy aside from the rats. The rats really got to me. But after getting out of this kind of abandoned house, he finds this book, this dusty book. It's got mold on it. He thinks it hasn't been touched in for a long time. And when he opens it up, he sees these strange pictures, these old school kind of like medieval kind of looking pictures of people flying, kids flying, parents flying, babies flying. And it turns out that this book is claiming that humans have the ability to fly, that this is some hidden ability that humans have. And maybe this book might have the secrets to unlock it. He doesn't take it seriously. He thinks it's strange. And when he gets back home with his dog, he kind of thinks about how this book is sort of whatever, and that, there's no way he's going to get Mia. There's no way he's going to live down the humiliation. And eventually he pressures himself to read the book and just try it out. See if the formula and the spell actually works. And I think you guys can guess what happens. This guy learns to fly. And when he learns to fly, oh man, you get this fantastically written scene of him flying through the clouds, his dog flying, him going backwards, looking at all the clouds, just enjoying life. And when he thinks that he finally got one up on Wilson, well, no. Wilson is right there with them, and they end up getting into this big competition. They end up becoming famous, and it all leads to this giant worldwide race viewed by 2 billion people, and it's going to prove which one of them is actually better and who can win over the girl. If that isn't a Disney story, I've ever heard it, I don't know what else is, man. This is Disney to its core. You have Jack Johnson, this guy who's kind of this coming of age character, that kid that doesn't get the respect that he deserves. You want to root for him. We've all been here. Are we all trying to get the girls? We always getting folded by that one guy that she's into, and we feel insecure. He's got that rivalry with his best friend. He wants to one up him. He constantly gets defeated. You have Mia being this very likable character, and you have this very extraordinary plot. The idea of basically being a superhero. And actually, in fact, Jack draws about superheroes. So when he learns to fly, he feels like Superman. He feels empowered. And that speaks to kids, especially speaks to the Disney audience. And when you get this giant race and the idea of being famous and a decision is made by Jack Johnson at the end of this book that is so cleverly done that I was like, yeah, man, this is a Disney movie if I've ever seen it. He decides to be the bigger person. He decides to take this moral route, and he realizes, being the best isn't what it all seems to be. There's problems with being at the top. And you know what? Sometimes the simple life is just better. And man, it wraps it up so nicely, puts that pretty little bow on the package. And this one definitely needed to be a Disney movie. And I want to hear your thoughts, my man, because I know you feel the same way.
Yeah, when I first read this, I've only read this book one time, and it was for a review for the first time ever on my channel. And the entire time, it's playing out in my head like a movie. And then when it got to like a certain part of the story, I'm like, yeah, this is a bona fide DCOM if I've ever read it. And a lot of it plays into the themes and the messages of the story. I know you touched on very well of the plot and stuff, but the whole thing with like him and Wilson and Mia and how that all plays out in the end is one of those Disney type of endings where everybody seems to win in the end. Everybody gets some sort of happy ending. Wilson gets his fame. Fame is the villain for Jack, and that plays into the theme where you don't need fame to have happiness, and Jack may have lied to get happiness to everyone else, but it was the only way out, and he knew that that was what it took. But he still holds that ability of what he had before. He just refuses to tell, and I think that's kind of poetic. To for it's definitely synonymous with those greater DComs that I can think of that have like a similar ending where the characters have gone through this long journey. They wanted something, they realize they want something else. They learn a moral lesson. They change as people. They actually develop, and they become better by the end. Jack's a better person. He started off as a whiny kid, complaining all the time, being second best to Wilson, constantly, comparing himself. And he realized, why am I doing this? Finally, he wakes up to the situation that he was in the whole time. He kept looking at it from a problematic stance. He was like, look, every time I get something, he always does it better than me. The reason why he compares himself the whole time is because they're both trying to impress a girl, and he figures out the one weakness Wilson never saw to get the girl is that you become famous. You can't just bring the girl with you. She has a life. She has to agree to do that. Wilson's probably happier that way, but he really wanted the girl the whole time. He didn't want the powers, and that's the thing. Wilson loves having the powers. He doesn't care. He just wants Mia. So there you go. Hopeless romantic, typical Disney crap.
Yeah, it reminded me too of a movie that I loved as a kid. I really need to rewatch this one. But I don't know if you've ever seen Sky High. This reminded me a little bit of Sky High, and honestly, that just made it feel even more to me, especially when it got to Jack wanting to be a superhero and drawing about superheroes. I'm like, yeah, this reminds me of Sky High quite a bit.
Yeah, he wants to be larger than life. He wants to be cooler than he is, but he has to deal with the reality. And then when he's finally given the abilities to change his reality, he goes through this whole story and has to realize that what he cares about needs to have some sacrifices involved. It's almost the same character growth with that character that Michael Aaron Garino played in Sky High as Jack Johnson. As a matter of fact, if this was made back in the day, the guy who played the main character in Sky High probably could have nailed Jack Johnson as a cast. Just saying.
Hey, there you go. It would have worked, man. And it's even funny too, because even Jack's parents are those kind of quirky Disney parents. Isn't his dad like a promoter? He's trying to look for like the next big star, the next big band, and then Jack ends up being the big star. And you see Jack's dad just hams it up. I could only imagine in a movie just promoting your kid as a superhero. I think he wears like a special costume that they made for him. It's just super played up and it's super fun. Like I can just
Yeah,
imagine a bunch of kids
doesn't he have
loving
like
it.
sponsors on his uniform? Like,
Yes.
yeah, they put sponsors. Typical Disney. If they see anything they could put ad placement in, they're going to do it.
Yeah, they had him performing at like a car dealership, I think. Like Disney would have taken advantage of that 100%.
Oh yeah, totally. They would have tried everything to put some of their brands in there just to get free advertising.
Of
That'd
course.
be a good story to do it with.
Of course.
And to kind of tie back, I think How I Learned to Fly is a perfect thing to go into this last bit before we get off here. How I Learned to Fly is like historically been this is the least Goosebumps book, right? Everybody always says this is not Goosebumps, right? Well, if you look at Disney Channel and you look at some of the stories they have there, and you look at these and the fact that there's so many that kind of fit Disney Channel, are there any Disney Channel movies that you think fit into Goosebumps more than Disney Channel? My pick would be Don't Look Under the Bed. I think it has some qualities there that are Disneyfied, but a lot of that story is played up like a Goosebumps book. Just saying.
The only one that I can think of off the top of my head is, well, actually, I can think of two, but these two movies, I think that their concepts could be Goosebumps stories, and that Stein would just have to make it darker. And that's the first Halloween Town. I think the first Halloween Town could have easily been a Goosebumps story. Obviously, I think the main villain is dark enough to be in Goosebumps, but just make the actual aspect of, your family ties being a witch, this town of monsters, this town of creatures, kind of make that more darker, and Halloween Town would have fit. And honestly, the same thing I think could apply for Scream Team. I can imagine Scream Team being a plot to a Goosebumps book. Again, just make it darker. Don't make, the boogity boogity boo kind of goofy characters. Make them more ominous. Make the whole idea of the afterlife and souls and ghosts kind of creepier. And just keep the villain the way he was in the beginning. You just take out that redemption factor towards the end. The villain in the beginning is dark, terrifying, intimidating. Hell, he shoots fireballs. He nearly burns down their house. He's an intimidating guy. So I think those two movies could have been for good Goosebumps stories. And honestly, I'm even gonna throw in a sitcom that I think there's a modern sitcom that I know you said you love this show and I love this show. My Babysitter is a Vampire. I think My Babysitter is a Vampire could have been something in kids horror, whether it would have been adapted by Are You Afraid of the Dark or Goosebumps. They could have taken aspects of that and maybe implemented it into a kids horror show or kids horror book, and it would have worked fine as well. So those would be my picks.
I think wasn't My Babysitter a Vampire a book series?
I have to see if it
I think
is.
there's something like that, and I'm
If
curious
it
about.
if it is, I'm gonna buy all of it and I'm gonna read it.
I don't know. I don't know if it's loosely adapting the source material. If it is, though, it's kind of like Twitches. Twitches was a book series, and we got 2 films out of it,
Mhm.
which is kind of weird when you think about some DComs. They took book series, like Cheetah Girls was a book series. They took Twitches, maybe My Babysitter's a Vampire, if it's actually one. But they didn't take Goosebumps. They didn't think to take Goosebumps and make DComs. They have the IP now. Disney's working with Sony. They haven't, announced anything like a straight to Disney Plus Goosebumps movie or anything.
We need to bring DComs back. You're 100% right. Disney acquired Goosebumps. This is the opportunity, people. If anyone's watching, bring it back, people. Bring back the magic.
Or if you want to, if you still want to be Disney and make How I Learned to Fly into a movie, I think most fans would even take that just
We'll
because it's
take it.
based on Goosebumps.
And I just want to give a little, I guess, recommendation to people as well, because I know me and completionists are fans of these kind of decom books because we see them as decoms. But for any of you out there that read kids horror and you don't like these type of stories because it's not scary, it's not what you expected when you picked up the book series or stuff like that, I can get that sentiment and I can understand it. But I think when it comes to books like these, maybe just I don't know, maybe just go in it with an open mindset, treat it like you're watching an individual movie or reading an individual book, because honestly, even though they're not that scary and even though they don't fit into kids horror, they're fun stories a lot of the time, and you can actually have a blast. You can have something charming, you can have something that resonates with you, and as long as you're open-minded to it, sometimes they can end up being some of your favorite stories. Like How I Learned to Fly, it's going to be high rated on my list when I do OG62. Even though it's nothing like Goosebumps, I enjoyed it a lot. Creature Feature, I enjoyed it a lot. There's stories on here, Deep Trouble, that we like. So just be open minded. Don't always be so, closed into just horror. And it's not just because I think that your opinion is invalidated. No, just because I think that these stories might be ones that you enjoy as long as you go in it with that framework. And who knows, you might find some fun reads.
Yeah, and then like the inverse to that, I would also add on to that is like I think that going into an open mind with these is the best option. But if you are some of the few that go into these blind, or you went into these blind before, we talked about them, I can totally understand going into something like We Wish You a Scary Christmas, and you want something else than what the book brings you because you don't want it to go that decom route. You just don't want it to be Christmas cliche and corny, but it just ends up being that. That's the negative side of the coin. I totally get that. I totally get that. And a lot of the time when people say that, oh, this is not kids horror, this is a decom, they're saying this in a negative context. Some of these, I think, are top 3 all have that decom quality, but in the good lens. It's the good lens of it. Now there are, like I said, the inverse would probably be Three Faces of Me and We Wish You Scary Christmas for me, but
And
the other
long,
ones have the charm because of that.
yeah, and for
So
me, for me, Long Ago Locket, you don't need to watch that episode. It's okay, guys. Just listen to my recommendation. Don't watch that episode. You could save yourself 20 minutes.
yeah, I think we said all that we wanted to say. I had a blast doing this with you. By the way, I love doing collabs with you. We need to do more in the future.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was our picks for our top 5 with some honorable mentions of kids horror stories that feel more like Disney Channel original movies. Let us know down in the comment section. Did you like our picks? Did we miss any picks? What would you have added to the discussion? We are dying to know. I'm also going to put the Horror Tavern. I'm going to put his information in the description and in the comment section down below for you to go check him out. Please go sub him up. Please go check out his content. Check out his YouTube shorts. They're hilarious. They're going to make you laugh at least 3 times a day. Depends on how many times you watch them. So until next time, take care. We hope you see you next time. Peace.
This is